The summer of 1843 was the hottest Louisiana had seen in years. The air didn't move. Even the trees along the edge of the Beaumont Plantation seemed frozen in place, their Spanish moss hanging like old funeral veils. The fields stretched wide and endless, cotton trembling faintly under a sun that showed no mercy. Men collapsed that summer. Animals did too. But the old man in the far shed refused to die. His name had once been Elijah. Most of the plantation called him Old Eli, though not kindly. He had worked those fields longer than most of the overseers had been alive. 43 harvest seasons. 43 years of sun, mud, blood, and silence. His back had bent slowly over time until it no longer straightened fully. His hands had become twisted maps of scars. And now, at nearly 70, he lay on a straw mattress in a storage shed behind the main house, waiting for death. Everyone believed it was coming. Everyone except the plantation owner. Thomas Beaumont stood on the porch of his grand white estate, staring toward the shed with narrowed eyes. He was a tall man, stiff posture, silver streaks already cutting through his dark hair despite being only 38. He didn't look like a cruel man, but cruelty rarely announced itself loudly. "Sir," the overseer said quietly behind him, "he won't last much longer. Might be better to let nature take him." Thomas didn't respond immediately. He kept staring. Finally, he said, "No, just that." One word. The overseer shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, he can't work anymore. Doctor says his lungs are failing." Thomas turned slowly. "And who asked the doctor to decide when my property expires?" The overseer lowered his gaze. Property. That was the word Thomas always used. Never names. Never stories. Never people. The doctor had indeed said Elijah wouldn't survive the month. His breathing had become shallow and irregular. His skin felt cold even under that brutal Louisiana heat. Sometimes he drifted into long silences where even the flies seemed to hesitate around him. But every time it seemed his chest might finally stop rising. It didn't. He would inhale again, weak, but stubborn. And Thomas Beaumont hated that stubbornness. It wasn't about compassion. It wasn't about mercy. It was about something older, something personal, something no one else understood. 40 years earlier, when Thomas had been just a boy of 8, he'd wandered too far into the lower marshlands bordering the plantation. The swamp had always fascinated him. Its silence felt different from the fields. Thicker, watching. He remembered stepping into mud too deep, the ground swallowing him slowly, panic rising, screaming for help. No one heard, except Elijah. Back then, Elijah had been strong, broad shoulders, quick steps. He had waded into that mud without hesitation, pulled Thomas out, saved him, and then, soaking wet and breathing hard, he had looked at the boy, not as property, not as master, but as something fragile. Human. Thomas remembered that look. He had never forgiven it. Years later, when Thomas inherited the plantation from his father, Elijah was still there, older, quieter, watching. There was something in the way Elijah looked at him that unsettled Thomas. It wasn't fear. It wasn't hatred. It was memory. As if Elijah knew something Thomas had tried to bury. And now, decades later, Elijah lay dying in that shed. And Thomas could not allow it. Because if Elijah died, the last witness died with him. "Keep him alive," Thomas ordered. "Sir, feed him broth, water, whatever he needs. I don't care what it costs." The overseer blinked. "But sir, why?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "Because I said so." The workers whispered. At night, when the air cooled slightly and cicadas screamed from the trees, they whispered about old Eli. They said death had already come for him once. They said he had refused it. They said something waited in that shed. Some swore they saw shadows moving inside, even when no lantern was lit. One girl claimed she heard Elijah speaking clearly one night. Not coughing, not wheezing, but speaking in a strong, steady voice. Talking to someone. No one else was inside. Inside the shed, Elijah's eyes opened. Slowly. The lantern flame flickered beside him. His breathing rattled softly, but his gaze was sharp, far sharper than a dying man should be. He stared toward the wooden door. as if he could see through it, as if he knew someone would eventually stand there. Thomas avoided the shed for weeks. He issued orders from a distance. He signed medical expenses. He demanded reports. But he never stepped inside, until one night in late August. The sky had turned an unnatural shade of red at sunset. The air felt electric. Storm clouds gathered but refused to break. Thomas couldn't sleep. The house felt smaller than usual. The walls creaked despite there being no wind. And then he heard it, a knock, not at the front door, not from outside, from somewhere deeper. He sat upright in bed. Silence. Then again, 3 slow knocks. He followed the sound through the hallway, heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt since childhood. The knocks weren't coming from inside the house. They were coming from outside, from the direction of the shed. Lantern in hand, Thomas walked across the yard. Each step felt heavier than it should. The workers' cabins were dark. No one stirred. The shed door stood closed. But the knocking continued. The storm did not pass by morning. It settled. Heavy clouds pressed low over the plantation, as if the sky itself had descended to watch. Rain fell in steady sheets, turning the cotton fields into pale, drowned ghosts of themselves. The air smelled of wet soil and rot. Thomas Beaumont had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the swamp, not as it was now, but as it had been 40 years ago. He had told no one the full story, not even himself. Memory is strange like that. It reshapes itself to protect the one who carries it. But storms have a way of unearthing buried things. The truth was this. The swamp had not taken him by accident. He had gone there chasing something. A voice, soft, whispering. He remembered standing at the water's edge, hearing his name spoken gently from somewhere deeper inside the marsh. Thomas. He had stepped forward willingly. The mud had swallowed him quickly, too quickly. He hadn't screamed at first. He had listened. The voice had promised something. Freedom, power, inheritance, things an 8-year-old boy should not understand. And then he had begun to sink. Only when water touched his mouth did he panic. Only then did he scream. And Elijah had come. But Elijah had not simply pulled him free. Thomas remembered now. He remembered Elijah grabbing his arm, dragging him from the mud, and then turning back toward the swamp, as if speaking to it, as if apologizing, as if bargaining. Thomas had never told that part, because it didn't make sense, because admitting it meant accepting that something had been there, listening, waiting. By noon the rain slowed. The fields were silent, too silent. No birds, no insects. The workers moved cautiously, whispering again. They had heard the storm, but they had heard something else too. Movement, out in the flooded lowlands. Heavy movement. Thomas stood at his study window, staring toward the distant tree line. The swamp bordered the plantation like a scar, and he swore the water level had risen higher than it should, as if it were inching forward, claiming ground. A knock came at his study door. The overseer stepped in, pale. "Sir, he's asking for you." Thomas didn't turn. "He can wait." The overseer swallowed. "Sir, I don't think he means to." Thomas entered the shed just before sunset. The air inside felt different. Cooler, damp. Elijah lay in the same position, but his breathing was steadier now. Stronger. Impossible. "You look better," Thomas said stiffly. Elijah's eyes opened slowly. "I won't for long." Thomas stepped closer. "What did you mean last night?" Elijah studied him quietly. "You remember the voice," he said. It wasn't a question. Thomas felt his throat tighten. "I was a child." "Yes." "And children hear things." "Yes." Silence stretched between them. Then Elijah whispered, "But you answered." The lantern flame flickered. Outside, thunder rolled faintly again, though no lightning followed. "You walked into it," Elijah continued. "It didn't drag you." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Enough. You promised it something." The words felt like a blade sliding between ribs. "I was 8. It doesn't care." Thomas stepped back. "You're dying," he snapped. "Your mind is rotting." Elijah gave a soft, tired smile. Death would be kinder. The shed walls creaked, not from wind, from pressure, as if something outside leaned against them. Slowly. Testing. You think keeping me alive breaks the deal? Elijah asked. Thomas said nothing, because that was exactly what he had thought. For 40 years, he had convinced himself of it. As long as Elijah breathed, the bargain remained incomplete. The swamp had taken nothing. The debt had no balance. But now, he wasn't so certain. What did you say to it? Thomas demanded suddenly. Elijah's gaze drifted toward the ceiling beams. I told it you were foolish. That's not funny. I told it you were small. Thomas's chest rose sharply. And then, I told it I would take your place. The words sucked the air from the room. Thomas stared. That's impossible. Yes. Yes, it is. Elijah coughed then, but not weakly, not like before. It sounded deeper, wet, as if water shifted somewhere inside his lungs. The swamp does not forget, Elijah murmured. It waits. Outside, the ground trembled, not violently, but enough to shift dust from the rafters. Thomas felt it. The plantation had never trembled before. Not once. Elijah, he said, voice lower now. What did you do? Elijah looked back at him with something that resembled pity. I saved a boy. The shed door slammed shut behind Thomas. He spun around. No wind. No one there. The latch twisted slowly. Locked. From the outside. Thomas rushed to it, pulling hard. It would not budge. He turned back. Elijah had pushed himself upright. He should not have had the strength. Yet he sat there now, breathing evenly, watching. You should have let me die, Elijah said softly. The lantern flame stretched unnaturally tall. The air smelled suddenly like swamp water. Rot. Decay. Old leaves. You think death ends the agreement? Elijah continued. Thomas's hands trembled against the door. You're insane. No. A pause. You are. From beneath the floorboards. A sound, like thick mud being pressed upward, though it bulged slightly. Thomas stepped back. Elijah... But the old man's eyes were no longer focused on him. They were fixed on the floor, as if something beneath them had finally arrived. Thomas Beaumont was never found. Not that week. Not that year. Not ever. The official story was simple. He had wandered into the swamp during the storm and drowned. It happened often enough in Louisiana. The land swallowed men. The water hid them. The plantation records were updated. A distant cousin took temporary control of the estate. Life resumed its rhythm, harvesting, counting, shipping, surviving. But something had shifted. The workers felt it first. The air had changed. The swamp had grown quiet, not peaceful, just satisfied. Elijah was buried behind the workers' quarters beneath a crooked cypress tree. No stone marked the grave. No name carved in wood. Only disturbed earth and silence. Yet for weeks after his burial, strange things began to happen. The fields closest to the swamp would not grow. Cotton rotted before blooming. Animals refused to graze near the tree line. At night, the water glowed faintly under moonlight. Not bright, just enough to notice. The new plantation overseer, a practical man named Henry Cole, dismissed the whispers. Storm damage, he said. Superstition. But Henry did not know the full history. He did not know what Thomas had remembered. He did not know what Elijah had bargained. And he did not know the swamp had not taken Thomas completely. 40 years passed. The Civil War came and went. The plantation fell into ruin. Ownership changed hands repeatedly. Records were lost. Buildings decayed. The grand White House became hollow, its paint peeling like shedding skin. The shed behind it collapsed entirely. But the swamp remained. Unchanged, waiting. In 1883, a young historian named Samuel Wright purchased the abandoned property for almost nothing. He was fascinated by forgotten Southern estates, by decayed histories, by stories buried beneath official records. The Beaumont plantation intrigued him. There were gaps, large ones, especially around the disappearance of Thomas Beaumont. Samuel found only one surviving document mentioning it. A letter written by an overseer. It described Thomas vanishing during a storm and ended with a strange sentence. The water rose without rain. Samuel underlined it. Curious, he arrived in autumn. The air was cooler now. The plantation looked skeletal under gray skies. Samuel was alone. He preferred it that way. Solitude made it easier to listen to old places. And this place, it felt like it wanted to speak. On his second night, Samuel dreamed of water. Thick, black, still, he stood at its edge, staring down. And beneath the surface, a shape stared back, not moving, just watching. When he woke, his sheets were damp, not with sweat, but with cold. He began exploring the property more thoroughly. Behind the main house, he found the remains of a collapsed structure, old nails, broken boards, fragments of rusted lantern hooks. He uncovered part of the foundation. Strangely, the earth beneath it was darker than surrounding soil, almost saturated, as if something had seeped upward long ago. That night, he heard knocking, 3 slow knocks, from somewhere underground. He froze, listened, silence. Then again, 3 knocks, deliberate, measured. He grabbed his lantern and stepped outside. The sound was not coming from a house. It came from beyond, from the direction of the swamp. The waterline was higher than it should have been. No rain had fallen in weeks. Yet the swamp pressed closer to the plantation grounds, as if claiming territory. Samuel approached cautiously. The knocking stopped. The surface of the water lay smooth, too smooth, like glass. Then ripples formed, not from wind, from beneath. A shape rose slowly on the surface, large, distorted, humanoid. Samuel stumbled backward. The surface broke, but not violently. A face emerged halfway, covered in mud, eyes open, unblinking, not decayed, not skeletal, preserved, waiting. Samuel's breath caught. The face looked familiar. He had seen portraits of Thomas Beaumont in old county archives. And this was him. Not aged, not rotted, exactly as he would have looked 40 years ago, frozen in time. The figure did not move fully from the water. It remained half submerged, its mouth opened slowly, and from it came a voice that did not belong to a living throat. 40 years. Samuel stumbled further back. The voice echoed strangely, as if spoken through hollow wood. Dead remains. The swamp water began to rise, not splashing, not flooding, rising deliberately, toward Samuel. He ran, back toward the plantation house. The water did not rush after him. It followed slowly. Patient, Samuel barricaded himself inside. His heart pounded violently. Through the cracked window, he saw the water stop at the edge of the property. It did not cross onto dry ground. It simply waited. The knocking returned that night, but now it came from beneath the house. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Samuel covered his ears. It continued, measured, steady, calling. Over the next days, Samuel's research uncovered something else. Old letters, hidden beneath loose floorboards. One written by Thomas himself. The handwriting frantic, uneven. The final lines read, "It says the bargain transfers. If I die without settling it, it chooses another bearer of the land. Ownership is inheritance of debt." Samuel stared at those words. Ownership is inheritance of debt. He had bought the plantation. Legally. Signed papers. Claimed title. And something ancient had acknowledged it. That night, the water crossed a boundary. No storm. No rain. It simply rose and spilled forward like ink poured across paper. Samuel watched from the upstairs window as the swamp crept across the yard, toward the house, toward him. The front door shook. 3 knocks. Louder now. The wood splintered.